I'm back, people. I have to say that 2020 is a kind of a dumpster fire, and August and September have been the worst so far for me. Okay, never mind. Let's think happy thoughts today, as we can continue on with our Cold War lessons. Yes, we're going back to our old friend Vicky. We're almost done, but I just need to address the thing that I mentioned at the end of the previous video.
It's a proxy war, John.
The Cold War is memorized as a time when two rival ideologies had struggles in multiple smaller nations. Vicky also, unsurprisingly, goes at the Vietnam War. Personally, I didn't like the idea of the Vietnam War. I think it should have never happened. It was only good in the Black Ops games. He did say a few inaccuracies in the video, but I won't go into that. I want to talk about the Soviet Union's proxy wars, and Vicky only so mentions the war in Afghanistan very briefly.
Let's now look at Afghanistan. To sum it up painfully quickly, the government was overthrown by a new socialist government known as the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. This government was quickly attacked by reactionary insurgencies and then asked the Soviet Union to help. And as you do among comrades, in 1979 the USSR intervened. The USA then gave lots of money to the people fighting the USSR, that being Al-Qaeda among others. After about 10 years, the Soviet government decided it could no longer deal with this and left again. The Democratic Republic of Afghanistan then quickly fell to the reactionary armies. Those armies then later blew up 2 towers in New York, but that's a different story.
Yeah, he basically explains how they were warm, fuzzy allies that were bullied by the West. First, the Communist Party of Afghanistan came to power in a coup laid down by the Tsar Revolution in 1978. Just like China, I wonder why Vicky, who supports the idea of free elections as a legitimate transfer of power, would recognize a government that violently took over. Yeah, I wonder why. Anyway, the Democratic Republic vigorously oppressed opposition and executed thousands of political prisoners. Naturally, whenever oppressive governments come into power, anti-government armed groups rise up. That's how the Afghan Civil War started, and it also opened up the way to the Afghan-Soviet War a year later. Also, it's worth noting that there were massive divisions inside the Afghan Communist Party, and it led to many purges. General Secretary Nur Muhammad Taraki was assassinated by his second-in-command, Hafizullah Amin, something that infuriated the Soviets. That's why Leonid Brezhnev staged another coup in December 1979 called Operation Storm-333 and installed their own guy, Babrak Kamal. There's quite a lot that Vicky didn't exactly explain. Also, and secondly, let's talk about the US's involvement in the Soviet-Afghan War. Was it an imperialist move, or was it because the Soviet-backed commies kidnapped and murdered Adolf Dubs, the then US ambassador to Afghanistan? I don't know, you be the judge. But let's talk about some other proxy wars that Vicky didn't talk about, like Angola, for example. Angola gained its independence from Portugal in November 1975, and the two sides with the most power were the UNITA government, which is recognized by many international world leaders, and the communist MPLA movement. Well, it's worth noting that the Soviet Union, East Germany, and Cuba also invaded the country to help their communist allies, which have some of the worst human rights records, such as arbitrary arrest, detention, and torture. That's just one proxy war that isn't talked about, although I'm glad it was featured in the Call of Duty Black Ops 2 game.
Sometimes it's too late to save a man. Let's move out before we join him in death. The mortar means the MPLA is ready for attack. They want a fight! We give them a fight! Move out!
Mason, you copy?
Go ahead, Hudson!
MPLA forces advancing on your position about 1 click north.
Hey, we know! Svimby's leading a countercharge!
He's got balls, I'll give him that.
What about Woods? Do we have confirmation on his location?
They've been moving him from one location to another. We expect Savimbi's men to report back soon.
The motors have stopped! Here they come! Here they come, my brothers! Fight, my brothers!
I solemnly want to talk about the Soviet Union's other examples of military adventurism, especially since Vicky mentioned the US involvement in Latin America.
As is tradition, I completely neglected Latin America in this video. Basically, it's always the same story. A country elects a socialist government, and then the CIA stages a coup and kills all suspected communists and props up a fascist puppet regime there. There's a Wikipedia article about it. If I mentioned all of those, the video would be twice as long.
The Soviet Union violated the sovereignty of multiple Latin American nations, such as Paraguay in 1947, when revolutionary communists wanted to overthrow the government. Another example is the Salvadorian Civil War in 1979, when the Soviet Union supported communist militias, or the attempted forming of anti-government militias in Honduras. But naturally, this extends beyond the borders of Latin America, such as the 1958 Lebanon crisis when Soviet-backed Lebanese revolutionaries attempted to take over. You also had the Dofer Rebellion, where the Soviet Union aided communist insurgents. There are many examples of these in the Third World. What I would like to mention here is when the Soviet Union supported separatism in my country. Yes, one de facto proxy war is the Canadian government's fight against the FLQ, or the Quebec Liberation Front. They were Marxist-Leninist paramilitary groups in Canada that advocated for an independent Quebec. Starting in 1963, they took part in over 160 violent attacks. They attacked Canadian military installations with Molotov cocktails, bombed railroads, bombed the RCMP headquarters, instigated car bombings, committed armed robberies, commenced riots. They bombed the Montreal Stock Exchange, they kidnapped people, and they hijacked an airplane and diverted it to Cuba. Their last big operation was the 1970 October crisis, when the FLQ kidnapped and killed a diplomat and forced the government to activate the War Measures Act, the first time that the Canadian military was combat ready on Canadian soil since the Second World War. However, they lost, and the FLQ support dwindled that same year. But the point is that the Soviet Union supported a terrorist government to attack a NATO country. Yeah, and on top of that, they actually tried to cover up the attack on Canada, I will call this an attack on Canada, by claiming that the CIA instigated this as a false flag attack to spark outrage against the Soviet Union. Not only that, but they resettled the remaining members of the FLQ into Cuba, where they were given asylum. So yeah, those were some proxy wars that needed attention, and I thought I should bring them to light. I wonder how Vicky would comment on them. Okay, that was a little take on the proxy wars. The last part of this response series will focus on the end of the Cold War next week.